Our next conversation will be led by my colleague, Julia Manchester. Take it away, Julia.
Thanks, Steve. Food and water are two resources that we can't live without, and yet access to these vital resources is scarce in many places and may become more so as populations grow and the effects of climate change are felt. My next guests are experts on building sustainable food and water systems. Regina Anderson is the executive director of Food Recovery Network, a national nonprofit that unites students at colleges and universities to fight food waste and hunger. And Kristi Pullen Fedinick is the Chief Science Advisor and Senior Scientist at NRDC, where she works to advance data-driven solutions at the intersection of environmental health and public policy. Welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and Regina, would just like to start with you on this. You know, you hear a lot about the current food system in the United States and that it's failing or it's not really up to, the best standards. What do you see is wrong with the system and how can we fix this going forward?
Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for your time today. I did want to just start off real quick with a land recognition that I am here in Washington, D.C. I am the Piscataway group that used to inhabit this land. So I'm on the land of the Piscataway ancestors. So first of all, with our food system, we built it. We can absolutely make it better. And I think, with the last speaker, there's a lot of scary things that are happening. There are a lot of broken pieces to our food system. There are a lot of pieces of our food system that are out of date. There are a lot of racist structures within our food system that, just based on how the country was started, that are embedded within our food system. And we can actually pull out all of those things. We can fix all of those things across the food system, from growing food to when we actually, eat food, whether it's at a restaurant or our own homes, there is food loss. But luckily, Food Recovery Network and a lot of our amazing allies, Dr. Kristi at NRDC being one of them, one of many, we have seen a lot of amazing innovations and changes around how we think about our food system. So we can infuse that hope and we can infuse those better practices. And for us at Food Recovery Network, part of that is getting the next generation of young people who automatically out of the gate want to ensure that our food system works for everyone. And the simple way to do that is to ensure that the really beautiful food that our farmers grow isn't thrown away at any point during the transportation of our food. So it might feel dire, and there are a lot of stats that back that up, and Dr. Kristi and I can throw out tons of those, but we can also tell you lots of amazing places where things are working and are improving.
Yeah, and Kristi, I'll get to you in a moment, but Regina, on that issue of food waste, can you give us a sense of the scale of food waste that's in this country? I mean, we hear so much about it, but how much is it actually taking place?
Yeah, it is a big problem. And the thing is, today we can do something better about how much food we're wasting. And the students that are part of Food Recovery Network, when we think about, being born into climate crisis, when I was growing up, it was, climate change and maybe we should start to recycle. But for the students at Food Recovery Network, born into climate crisis, where we feel like we've already missed the mark on some things, it is an immediate step in doing the right thing to counteract the nefarious elements that go into wasting our food. So, currently millions and millions and millions of pounds of food are wasted through, again, any step in the food system. So when we grow this beautiful, precious food, 10 million tons of that food is tilled back under for a lot of different reasons. When farmers grow the food for a lot of different reasons, not all of that food is bought, sold. As we're transporting food, millions of tons of that food is lost. We have labeling of packages of food that confuse people, that don't look so sharp to the grocery store managers. So we pull food that is still perfectly good food for people to eat. And so within all of that, $408 billion worth of food every year goes unsold or uneaten. And that actually makes up about 2% of our gross domestic product. So that's a lot. But on the flip side, when we think about what NRDC is doing around our water, all the precious resources that it goes to, growing all this food, watering all this food that we just toss away as well. So when we put in different structures, when we think about where is this food being lost, why is it so easy to throw away this food or chill it under? There are easy solutions, and ReFed, another wonderful partner that FRN works with, and I know NRDC works with as well, proves to us, and Food Recovery Network is a beautiful example of that we can ensure that we stop throwing away that food, that there are literally very simple solutions that can make a big impact, and to ensure that the 42 million people who are currently food insecure right now in this country get the food that they deserve.
Absolutely. And those are, startling numbers that you threw out. And Kristi, on that note, what's the state of water in the United States and the availability of clean drinking water?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And similar to Regina, I also want to acknowledge the Manahoac people on whose land, I'm currently residing, really close in proximity to the Piscataway land that Regina is on. Yeah, I mean, our drinking water systems are crumbling around us, right? Our infrastructure, some of it dates back to the Civil War. We need significant investment in ensuring that the structures that are building or that are bringing our water to us every day are fixed and aren't leaking and aren't leaching lead into, the water that we're drinking and then into our bodies. And so, the infrastructure needs to be replaced and updated. We also need updates to the law itself. So the Safe Drinking Water Act, which is the federal law that covers our drinking water, has, a number of standards and rules that aren't necessarily protective of communities. And one of the things that we found in some of our research is that, the infrastructure issues, the drinking water violations, aren't distributed equally across the country. So folks aren't being protected in the same way. And so we found that communities of color are disproportionately burdened by drinking water issues, as well as the other issues, the contamination of air, contamination of water, contamination of food, all of these different issues, resource insecurity. So all of these things really are compounding in ways that are leaving people without access to the water, this precious resource that they need every day.
Right. And, on that issue of access to water, you hear a lot in the news media for years now about the horrible conditions in Flint, Michigan, and how we're still struggling with that issue. And you talked about how communities of color are particularly impacted by this issue. Just to get a sense of where this is an issue, is this a geographic thing, or is it really evenly dispersed across the country in a lot of these lower income communities or communities of color?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say that the issues with drinking water are, hyper local in a lot of ways, right? Our drinking water systems are in the individual places in which we live. And so there's really a mosaic of drinking water systems across the country, and they all face different issues. We found that there are drinking water issues with lead. So if we just talk about lead all across the country in all 50 states, we have an analysis that showed that 30 million people are impacted by violations of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And that was using previous data to really try to illustrate the scope of this problem. But one of the big issues that we found when we were looking at the 2015 lead data was that even though Flint was having significant and grave issues with lead, they didn't show up in our maps at all. And so, we know that the states, that states aren't necessarily reporting some of the data on lead, to the US EPA, to the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, to give us access to those data. So there could be a lot of folks in communities that we're missing. And so we know that it's really pervasive. We know that there are issues with lead everywhere. And that's why, we really need to make sure that the Biden-Harris administration proposal to remove 100% of lead service lines in full goes into place. And so, it would help us not only with the communities that we can see in which there are problems occurring, but also the communities that we could be missing because of, gaps in the data that we have.
Right. And my next question is I'll pose to both of you, and we've already touched on it a bit, but I'd love to hear from you both. And I'll start with you, Regina. Why is this, food waste problem or dealing with water? Why is this a social justice issue? We've already touched on it a little bit, but I'd love if you could elaborate.
Absolutely. And so, and I wanted to just say thank you to Kristi for, illuminating the mosaic problem around where we see lead in our water, issues with our water. With food as a right, you started the conversation off by saying, just that it is a right, it is a human right. We do see that communities of color are affected by access, not having the same kind of access to food for a variety of reasons. And we can really drill down on what that means to have actual access to food. But it is communities of color that are systematically denied the same kind of access to food. And so at the same time, our country is growing mass amounts of food that is not, as I was mentioning before, it's not going anywhere. It's being thrown away. And so it's a social justice issue to ensure that we can at least take this beautiful surplus food and take the dignity that it took to grow that food and not throw that all away. Take that dignity and give it to people who are hungry. They shouldn't be hungry. We shouldn't have 42 million people, and it was 35 million before the pandemic, who are hungry. So it is a social justice issue. When we have full bellies, we can have the fortitude to, continue to be in our day-to-day lives. And for a lot of people, it is quite grinding. Living in poverty can be quite grinding. But if you have a full stomach, at least you can, have some energy to continue on, to do the things that you need to do to help lift yourselves and your families out of poverty. So it's a social justice issue there. But then also, when we throw away all this perfectly good food, we are directly warming up our climate. So we know that when we throw away food, we are overproducing CO2 that our atmosphere can't absorb. And so that, first of all, is affecting all of us. But when we do think about the mosaic, to use that word again, when we think about how that precipitates down into our everyday lives, who is that affecting? Who doesn't have the resources to withstand the climate changes that are occurring? So when we stop throwing away precious food, we are not directly harming our environment. So it is a social justice issue around people deserve food, they deserve water, and we should not be harming our environment by creating this cycle of violence. And again, FRN and the thousands of students and stakeholders who are part of this work, and we're so thankful to be in community with NRDC, say we can put a wrench in that cycle and make that cycle work for all of us.
Right. And Kristi, I'd like to pose the same question to you, but in addition, could you touch on the issue of climate change and how this is impacting clean water and water availability in the U.S.?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I think that from the social justice perspective, when we're really thinking about human bodies, right, we're biological systems. We need certain things in order to live, in order to thrive. We need water, we need clean, fresh water. We need air, we need to have access to, communities that love us, that support us, right, that psychosocial support. And so when you think about water contamination and the ways in which it adversely impacts communities, especially falling on the shoulders of disproportionately burdened communities, we really see that, again, communities of color were adversely and negatively impacted by drinking water contamination. But again, they're also facing, so low-income communities of color often bear the weight of other types of overlapping contamination. So contamination of their air from the fossil fuel industry, the lack of access to safe and healthy foods and water really do, create this perfect storm of burdens that we need to alleviate. And when we think about compounding that with climate change and, understanding what's going to happen in terms of, climate migration, even within our own country, systems that are already overburdened by a lack of water availability, right? In the Southwest, there are a number of issues where people don't have access to the water that they need. They can't afford it when they do have access to it, or those resources are deplenishing. So really ensuring that we're taking a full community, full person approach to all of these issues and understanding that it isn't one thing that's impacting people, but the totality of all of these issues.
Right. And my final question I'll pose to both of you again, and we only have a couple minutes left, so just a heads up. But what's a message you'd like to send to legislators at the federal, state, local level today on how to deal with having more water available, clean water available, as well as the issue of food waste and food availability? Regina, I'll start with you.
Great. Thank you so much. And again, thanks for this time and this opportunity. So we at Food Recovery Network work with a lot of partners, as I mentioned, to advocate on behalf of the fact that people need to have food. And so there's lots of different things that we would want the administration to know and our state, local, federal elected officials to know that food is a right, that we can work with our farmers, that we are directly confusing the consumer, which is one of the places where there is the most food loss, by having labeling, date labeling, that confuses people and it causes them to throw away food that they shouldn't have to throw away. So when we start to simplify things and work together, we can, as I was saying before, counteract this system that is hemorrhaging perfectly good food. And so I say, listen to young people, because they are the movement, they are the future, and they don't want to see really good food thrown away.
Absolutely. And Kristi, just really quickly, what message would you like to send to lawmakers?
Yeah, very similarly, listen to communities, right? I love data. Everyone loves data, but the community's experiences need to be elevated and listened to. Implement, the fixes that can remove lead from people's, homes and water. Make sure that we have funding that we need in order to build the systems that can support people, and really just strengthen communities by investing in all of the things that they need in order to have healthy and thriving lives.
Well, Kristi and Regina, thank you so much for really having this enlightening conversation. I myself don't know too much about this, and I feel like I've learned so much, and I really hope our audience can walk away and do the same.